Marcus Osei was 7 years old the first time someone told him he would never be anything. It was his uncle, a tall man with a loud voice and a habit of speaking as if every word he said was final, who pointed at Marcus across the dinner table one evening and said to his mother, "This one, sister, I am telling you, he is slow. Don't waste money on him." His mother said nothing. She just looked down at her plate. Marcus didn't fully understand what those words meant at the time, but he felt them. He felt them the way you feel cold water on your back on an early morning, sudden, sharp, and impossible to shake off. He grew up in a small, busy neighborhood in Accra, Ghana. The streets were narrow and always full of noise, the sound of traders calling out prices, of motorcycles weaving between people, of children chasing each other between the market stalls. It was the kind of place where everybody knew everybody, and because everybody knew everybody, everybody also knew everybody's business. And the business about Marcus Osei was this: the boy was a failure. He had failed 2 classes by the time he was 10, not because he was careless, and not because he didn't try. Marcus tried. Every night he sat under the yellow light of a small kerosene lamp and stared at his books until his eyes burned. But something about the way the school taught things never quite connected in his mind. Numbers and letters moved around on the page in ways that confused him. His teachers had no patience for confusion. They had too many students and too little time. And a boy who needed extra explanation was, to them, simply a boy who did not belong. By age 12, he had been removed from his school entirely. The day it happened, his mother walked him home in silence. She held his hand but said nothing. When they arrived at the house, she sat him down, looked at him for a long moment, and then said quietly, "You will find another way, Marcus." Her voice was soft, but her eyes carried something heavier, a mixture of love and worry that Marcus would never forget. The neighborhood did not stay quiet about it. Word spread, the way word always spreads in a place where everyone is watching. The other mothers talked. The other children whispered. His cousins made jokes he was not supposed to hear but always did. The verdict of the street was clear. Marcus Osei was the boy who could not make it. He spent his teenage years doing whatever work he could find. He carried goods at the market for traders who needed extra hands. He fixed bicycles in a small yard behind a mechanic's shop, learning by watching and by making mistakes. He swept floors, washed cars, ran errands. He was never lazy. He worked from early in the morning until his body told him it was time to stop. But no matter how hard he worked, he was always paid the smallest amount, always treated as someone temporary, always looked at as someone passing through, rather than someone building something. At 17, a distant relative came visiting from Lagos, Nigeria. He was well-dressed and full of energy, and he spoke about opportunities in the city, with a confidence that made everything sound easy. He told Marcus's mother that he could take the boy to Lagos, that there was good honest work waiting, that Marcus would come back in a year with money in his pocket and experience in his hands. His mother agreed. She packed a small bag for Marcus, pressed some money into his palm, money she had clearly been saving for a long time, and held his face in both her hands before he left. "Come back to me," she said. "I will," he told her. He meant it. He just didn't know what was waiting for him on the other side of that promise. What he found in Lagos was not opportunity. The relative put him to work in a large warehouse on the outskirts of the city, loading and unloading heavy goods from morning until night. There was no contract. There was no payment discussed. When Marcus asked about money at the end of his first week, he was told to wait. At the end of his second week, he was told to be grateful he had a place to sleep. By the third week, it was clear to him that he had not come to Lagos for a job. He had come to Lagos to be used. He spent 8 months in that warehouse. 8 months of hard physical work, bad food, very little sleep, and no pay. 8 months of being far from home and not knowing how to get back. 8 months of feeling completely trapped. But inside that warehouse, something else was happening, something quiet and slow, like a fire that starts with just a single small spark. Marcus was watching. He watched how the goods moved, how orders were placed, how traders communicated with suppliers. He watched which products sold quickly, and which ones sat in corners gathering dust. He was not being paid to think, but he thought anyway. He stored every observation in his mind, like someone carefully saving coins in a jar. One morning, he woke before the others, folded the thin blanket he had been given, placed it neatly on the floor, and walked out of that warehouse with nothing but the clothes on his body and 200 Nigerian naira that he had found folded inside an old jacket pocket. He did not look back. Getting back to Accra took him 3 difficult days. He traveled by shared buses and on foot, ate very little, and slept in bus stations. When he finally arrived home, his mother opened the door, looked at him, thin, dusty, and exhausted, and pulled him into her arms without a single word. He was 19 years old, back where he started, with nothing to show for the time he had been away. The neighborhood noticed. The comments came, as they always did. His uncle stopped by one evening and shook his head slowly, saying, "I told you, some people are just not made for more." Marcus sat on the front step that night for a long time, looking at the dark sky above the rooftops. He was not angry. He was not sad exactly. He was something harder to describe, a quiet, deep exhaustion with other people's ideas about who he was. He made a decision that night, not a loud decision, not the kind you announce to people, a private, firm, unshakable decision. He was going to stop living inside the story other people had written for him. He just didn't yet know how. A few weeks later, he was sitting on a bench outside the public library near his neighborhood. He was not there to read. The library had shade, and the afternoon sun was fierce, and he had nowhere else to be. He sat on that bench for several days in a row, watching people come and go, thinking, waiting for something he couldn't name. On the 4th day, an elderly man sat down beside him. The man was small and neat, with round glasses and white hair, and he carried a worn leather bag that looked older than Marcus. He said nothing at first. He simply sat, opened a book, and read. After some time, without looking up from his pages, he spoke. "You have been sitting on this bench for 4 days, the man said calmly. You are clearly not waiting for a bus." Marcus looked at him. "How do you know it's been 4 days?" "Because I have been coming here for 20 years, the man said, and finally looked up. "And I notice things." His name was Mr. Emmanuel Asante. He was a retired professor of economics who still came to the library every afternoon, out of habit and love for books. He had a gentle manner and a way of asking questions that made you want to answer honestly. Over the following weeks, Marcus found himself returning to that bench, and Mr. Asante was always there. Their conversations started small, about the neighborhood, about the weather, about the news. But slowly they grew deeper. Marcus told the old man about Lagos, about the warehouse, about school, about his uncle's words that had followed him like a shadow since he was 7 years old. Mr. Asante listened to all of it. He never interrupted. He never offered quick comfort or empty words. When Marcus finished, the old professor was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "The people who called you a failure were describing the limits of their own imagination, not the limits of your life." Marcus didn't say anything, but something inside him shifted. Mr. Asante began to spend real time with him. He brought books and explained them. He taught Marcus simple accounting, how money moves, how profit and loss work, how a small business functions. He explained what a market gap was and how to find one. He talked about microtrade and how some of the most successful businesses in Africa started with nothing more than a small amount of money, a good idea, and the discipline to keep showing up. Marcus absorbed everything. He was not slow, as his teachers had once told him. He had simply never been taught in a way that matched how his mind worked. With Mr. Asante, things clicked. Numbers made sense. Patterns became clear. For the first time in his life, someone was teaching him in a language his mind understood. After several months, Marcus applied for a small loan from a community cooperative in his neighborhood. The loan was 500 Ghanaian cedis. When he sat across from the committee and explained what he wanted to do, start a small stall selling mobile phone accessories, 3 of the 5 people in that room exchanged glances that said everything without a word. They approved the loan, but privately, 2 of them told others they doubted they would ever see that money again. Marcus set up his stall at a busy street corner in the Osu area of Accra. He woke up at 5 in the morning every day to get the best spot. He stayed until 8 at night. He learned quickly which products people actually needed, and which ones just looked good on a shelf. He kept careful records in a small notebook. Every sale, every expense, every profit. He treated every customer as if they were the most important person who had ever stopped at his stall, because to him, they were. Within 8 months, he repaid his loan, with full interest, and 2 months early. The cooperative committee members were surprised. Marcus was not. The stall grew into a proper shop. The shop grew into 2 shops. He hired his first employee, a young man from his own neighborhood who had also been told he was not good enough for anything. Then a second employee. Then a third. Marcus remembered what it felt like to be treated as temporary, as invisible, as someone without value. He made sure every person who worked for him felt the exact opposite. The years were not without hardship. In 2007, his shop was broken into, and a significant portion of his stock was stolen. He lost money he did not have to spare. In 2008, heavy rains flooded his storage space and damaged inventory he had not yet sold. In 2009, a business partner he had trusted completely disappeared, with funds they had pooled together for a joint order from a supplier in China. That last one hurt the most. Not just the money, but the trust. Marcus sat with that pain quietly for several weeks. But he did not stop. He reorganized. He borrowed carefully. He rebuilt, one day at a time. Through all of it, the voices from his past never fully went away. An old classmate posted mocking comments online. His uncle continued to tell people at gatherings that whatever Marcus had built would eventually fall apart. A cousin said publicly and repeatedly that Marcus's success was simply luck, that it had nothing to do with intelligence or hard work, because everyone knew Marcus simply wasn't capable of that. Marcus heard all of it. He chose to say nothing, not because he was afraid, but because he understood something important. The time he spent responding to doubt was time stolen from building, and he had too much left to build. By 2013, his company, which he registered formally as Osei Alpha Electronics, had a permanent address, legal documents, and a growing list of regular clients. By 2015, he had a warehouse, 2 delivery vehicles, and contracts with 3 corporate organizations that needed reliable electronic supplies. The boy from the narrow street who had failed 2 school grades was now running a real company. In 2017, a letter arrived that Marcus initially thought was a mistake. He read it 3 times before he believed it. He had been nominated for the West Africa Emerging Entrepreneur of the Year award, hosted by a respected Pan-African business coalition in Abuja, Nigeria. The nomination had been submitted quietly, without his knowledge, by Mr. Emmanuel Asante, who was now elderly and in poor health, but who had followed every step of Marcus's journey with the pride of someone watching a garden grow from a single seed they had chosen to water. Marcus flew to Abuja for the first time in his life. He wore a suit he had been fitted for 2 weeks before the ceremony, the first tailored suit he had ever owned. He sat in a large, elegant hall, surrounded by established business people, investors and journalists, and he felt, for a brief moment, exactly like the boy on that bench who had nowhere else to go. Then they called his name. When the presenter read his biography aloud, the failed grades, the warehouse in Lagos, the 500 CD loan, the decade of rebuilding piece by piece, the hall grew very quiet. Not an uncomfortable quiet, the kind of quiet that happens when a room full of people is truly listening. Then the applause came. Marcus walked to the front of that hall, received the award with both hands, and stood at the microphone for a moment without speaking. He looked out at the crowd. He thought about his mother's hands holding his face. He thought about the bench outside the library. He thought about Mr. Asante's worn leather bag, and the way the old man had sat beside a stranger, and decided, without being asked, to invest in him. Then he spoke. "I am not standing here tonight because I proved my doubters wrong," he said. "I am standing here tonight because I finally stopped letting them write my story." A journalist in the 3rd row recorded those words on her phone. Within 2 days, the video had traveled across Ghana, Nigeria, Côte d'Ivoire, and into diaspora communities in London, New York, and Toronto. Local television stations called. Online blogs shared his story. People who had never met him sent messages saying that his words had changed something in them. The street traders who had known him since his first stall started calling him by a name that spread and stuck, the way good names always do. They called him the Alpha King. Not because he wore it as a title, not because he asked for it, but because in the language of the market, of the street corners, of the people who had watched him from nothing, it simply fit. Today, Marcus Osei's company operates across 3 West African countries. He employs more than 40 people, and he has a specific habit when hiring. He looks first at candidates who have been told they are not enough. He looks for the ones with the quiet eyes and the careful hands. The ones who have been underestimated so many times that they have learned to work without applause. I know what it feels like, he tells every new employee on their first day, to be handed a verdict you didn't write. You are here because I see what they missed. Mr. Emmanuel Asante passed away peacefully in 2020. Marcus covered all the costs of his funeral and sat in the front row with the kind of grief that comes from losing someone who saw you before you could see yourself. He later established a small business literacy program for young people in low-income communities across Accra and named it after the old professor. Every year, on the anniversary of the first day they spoke outside the library, Marcus visits Mr. Asante's grave. He does not make a big event of it. He goes alone, in the early morning, stands quietly for a while, and then goes back to work. The uncle who called him slow never acknowledged what Marcus built. The cousin, who called it luck, never apologized. The classmates who laughed moved on to other things. Marcus never asked any of them for an apology. He had understood, somewhere along the long road from that 7-year-old boy at the dinner table to the man standing in that hall in Abuja, that the most complete kind of peace is the kind that doesn't need the other person to change in order for you to be free. He had stopped waiting for them to see him clearly a long time ago. He had learned to see himself. And that, in the end, was the only thing that had ever mattered.